Okay, everybody, welcome to the Atheist Society meeting, especially reconvened in an alternative location. The lighting is not much. Well, tonight's talk the title is Israel and Islamism, an indictment of religion. And I'm speaking because our speaker that was scheduled, James Fordor, had to cancel and he's rescheduled for next month. So I'm taking this opportunity just after the anniversary of the Hamas attack on the 7th of October last year to reflect upon religion in general and the Middle East conflict in particular, and the role of the religion in that conflict, which I believe is totally overlooked and is in fact rather fundamental to the nature of the conflict. The destruction and the scale of the humanitarian disaster in the Middle East has reached an intolerable level. Yet there is no solution in sight. The endless cycle of violence just escalates to new levels of depravity. The cause of the problem and the reason for the intractability of a solution is both obvious and unmentionable. Religion. It is not a coincidence that the conflict occurs in the so-called Holy Lands. It is not a coincidence that the antagonists are of different religions. Yet the religious motivations that have led to the conflict are not identified, let alone criticized. Most political leaders are themselves religious. Perhaps this induces a blindness to the issue. Perhaps they fear a backlash if they criticize religion. The fact that religion has a major role in this conflict is sufficient that religion should be indicted. I will elaborate on the religious origins of the conflict, but it is not the only reason that religions should be indicted, and I'll raise two other issues. Another reason is their total lack of credibility. A further reason is that they impose a burden on all societies, an economic burden, an economic cost that I would also like to elaborate on. Now, first, I would like to relate something about the conflict, the background to the issue that is causing such conflict within and between communities, both in Australia and everywhere. And I want to quote from a recent newspaper article by Louise Adler titled, "The Things I Have Learnt That You Can't Say About Israel." Louise Adler is a luminary figure and for many years was editor of Melbourne University Press. She is Jewish and her grandparents died in the Holocaust. She is a humanist. From the article, it says that in her youth, she was a member of a socialist Zionist youth movement and in her summer holidays went to Israel to work on a kibbutz, imagining it would be a socialist utopia. She writes, "Instead, the reality of the Zionist project made itself explicit upon arrival at the airport. European Jews stamped my passport, Middle Eastern Jews manned the baggage carousels, while Palestinians swept the floors and cleaned the toilets. It was the beginning of my education regarding the entrenched racism underpinning the state of Israel. A Jewish state is by definition exclusionary and therefore anti-democratic for those who are not Jewish. And you can see why she gets flack from the Jewish community for saying that. Technically, not all Jews are Zionists, but she says, I didn't think anyone would disagree, but you do. Why should, she says, why should Palestinians or anyone respect a distinction between Jewishness and Zionism when the Israeli state is founded on and its continued existence justified by precisely this conflation? When the Star of David is emblazoned upon the uniforms of the IDF soldiers who humiliate, torture, and murder Palestinians. She quotes a Palestinian who says, "There is a Jew who lives by force in half my house, in my home, and in Jerusalem, and does so by divine decree. Many others reside by force in Palestinian houses, while their owners linger in refugee camps. It is not my fault that they are Jewish." Louise has been vilified by the Jewish community for her sympathy for the Palestinians. Regarding the Holocaust, she says, the establishment of the Jewish state didn't arise as a response to the Holocaust. It was a nationalist project of the 19th century, and its advocates set aside the fact that a Jewish state would entail the denial of an indigenous population. Think of terra nullius transported to the Middle East. The tragic lesson that Israel failed to learn yet again on October 7 is that peace cannot be premised on the subjugation of a people. Violence inevitably returns. I'm still quoting. The lesson of October 7 is that you cannot normalize and live peacefully in the context of a profound ongoing injustice. Peace and justice will only come when Palestinians are recognized as a people with the right to self-determination, sovereignty, and a right to their own state. Well, I ask the question, who can disagree with Louise Adler? I don't. Well, some people do. However, apart from mentioning occupation, well, the thing I actually agree with what she says. I acknowledge that there's violence on both sides, obviously. But she only mentions divine decree. Otherwise, she doesn't mention religion at all. But I will. Now, there's two aspects that I want to mention about my indictment of religion. One is the cause of this violence. Another one is this: the total lack of credibility of religions. Religions are based on myth and confected stories that have been refuted scientifically and historically. There are no miracles. Let's look at the historical claims. Regarding Judaism, archaeological evidence says that the first 10 books of the Bible are pure myth. There was no historical Abraham. So says Israel Finkelstein, an archaeologist from the University of Tel Aviv. There were no Jews in Egypt, and a God did not kill all the firstborn. There was likely no King David, and Jehovah was a tribal god who had a wife called Asherah. The archaeological record shows the time when all the statues of Asherah were smashed. thereby forming so-called monotheism. I'll come back to more about that, the non-existence of Abraham. Christianity. There is no historical record of a Christian cult figure riding into Jerusalem on a donkey and causing a public disturbance. If we take out all the miracles of Jesus from the Jesus stories, what is left? There's no evidence for historical Jesus. The so-called evidence of Jesus in the writings of Josephus was a later insertion because it was not referred to until the 3rd century when it was inserted. Islam. There was no Mecca at the time that the alleged prophet is supposed to have ridden from the desert and conquered the lands of the Persian and Roman empires. The Arabs of Palestine and Syria were already part of a kingdom that had minted Arabic Christian coins, and I have one. Islam arose from an anti-Trinitarian Christian sect, which is evident from the Quran itself. It's full of Christian references and anti-Trinitarian ones. The fact that this is not known, maybe historians don't emphasize, I don't know why. All of those facts are known facts. They're just not accepted as being known. People don't want to accept them. By the historical evidence alone, let alone the scientific evidence, shows that Christian doctrines or religious doctrines have no credibility or validity and are state-sponsored superstitions sustained by indoctrination, socialization, and coercion. They stand indicted. Okay, now my second set of indictments, I just want to tell you, when I first became a humanist, I found that I was the only humanist economist. What I tried to do was do an economic analysis of the cost of religion to society. Think of how you arrive at national income. Every country's got a national income. And it's actually the summation of all the people's income and the company's. But let's say that my capacity to earn an income depends on the number of hours that I work. So if I work half the number of hours, I earn half the income. Now, if a religion decrees that only half the population can work, then the potential income of the country is cut by up to a half. And in some countries, that is the case. Looked at in terms of the workforce participation of women, okay? It varies from country to country, but in most of the religious countries, especially Arab countries and Muslim countries, there is very low women workforce participation, which means there's a loss in capacity of personal income and national income, and that I attribute as being a cost of religion. Okay, and that's only one cost. That's the first item I've done. I've done this table. I originally did this an article which I've got a reference for. It was published in Australian Humanist in 2003, and I've just gone back and I've made a simpler table to show the costs. So going through it, there's a cost due to completely wasted time spent on religious observances when they could have been doing something productive. That's a cost. It's all the time spent devoted to religion is totally a waste of time. And it would be far better if they did something useful. I'm trying to find something a bit good to say about religions. Charitable works, okay. Well, maybe. Charitable works in some countries where there's nothing else, maybe that's the only possibility of charitable works. But I don't count it as a positive because if that's the only option, to return to religion for charity, then it comes with so many strings attached and entrenches the religion. It's not a cost. It's not a benefit. It's a cost. So I will. There is something I would say positive about Christianity, but anyway, now exactly that wasn't long ago.
How gender equality is fairly recent and therefore quite shallow.
Yes, I think Robert's making the point. The people on Zoom maybe can't hear you. It was only about 1970s.
1972.
Yes.
Year after women at last were allowed to stay in the workforce after they got married. All teachers used to have to retire. Women had to get out the day they got married.
Women had to retire from the public service the day they got married. Yes. Here, recently, 70s. So all of those things are a cost of religion. Now, when you add them up, okay, I went through the GDP of each country, divide them up. I did divide into Muslim and non-Muslim, but low, middle, and income. And down the bottom, you can see what I've estimated as the total cost. And the total cost is actually borne more by low and middle income countries than high income countries. Now, that is, okay, partly that's a one-off cost, but partly it's an annual cost that accumulates every year, like a compound interest, because whatever income you get, you can invest and earn more income. So it's not, I make a proviso that this is just a static interpretation. It doesn't allow for the compounding effect of this happening every year. So in the sense, these costs are an underestimate. Now, let's say the total world, what that suggests is without religion, total world income would go up by 1.33%, which would be a hell of a big change. I mean, you wouldn't have a recession. That 1% of GDP is the difference between a recession and not a recession. So it's a significant cost. It happens every year. So that is my second indictment of religion. Now I've got I want to go start to look at the history of the Middle East. Now, after the First World War, Palestine was taken from the Ottoman Empire and became a British mandate. Okay, the whole Middle East was all divided up between the British and the French. Now, at that time, and even before that time, the concept of a Jewish state had been prevalent amongst European Jews. So it had been a long-standing ambition. And Joe's made the point that a lot of the people who were instigating for a Jewish state were atheists. They weren't necessarily religious fanatics. But gradually, religion has actually taken over and inflamed both sides of this whole problem.
There you go, atheists.
No. We're not to blame, mate. We're the solution. Now, what happened was there was a lot of, during the time of the British Mandate, there already had been trouble on both sides. The Jewish terrorism against the British occupiers on the grounds that they were agitating and using attacks on the British to try to establish a Jewish state by force. The Balfour Declaration is famous because it was the first kind of public statement of anyone, well, maybe we'll have a Jewish state. So what it said was this: Her Majesty's governments view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. National home, not a Jewish state. And will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So, I mean, this expresses the conundrum, is that there's a conflict between the ambitions of the Jewish people and the rights of the native Palestinians, and they say that, oh well, we'll just do both and somehow it'll work, but it didn't work. So I mean, it highlighted the problem, but it never expressed a solution. But it certainly gave the Jewish people cause for optimism that they were going to get their long sought after state. Now, that's not the next slide that I wanted, I don't think. I must have missed a slide. There was meant to be a slide there, which relates to United Nations Resolution 181. And this was in 1947. The resolution passed by the United Nations General Assembly that called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, with the city of Jerusalem as a corpus separatum, which means in Latin separate entity, to be governed by a special international regime. So that was that stage, the United Nations didn't have that many members, but it passed. But there was a dissenting proposition to the partition, and the dissenting proposition was a so-called binational state, which means that there was a single state, but they shared power. Okay. Now, my contention is if that resolution had have passed instead of resolution 181, the entire history would be completely different. Lebanon is not a good example, I know. But anyway, that resolution, I had another slide, but that's what it said. And the resolutions of the General Assembly are not legally binding, but at that point, the Jewish residents of what was then Palestine took it upon themselves to declare a state. They had a meeting and they declared a state, and it just snowballed from there. And all throughout this entire history, there was violence between the Jewish settlers and the Palestinian residents. They both had violence, because they're both guilty of violence against each other. But after this declaration, one account is that the Jewish settlers massacred a Palestinian village, and after that, there's a mass exodus of Palestinians and from Tel Aviv and all the other Palestinian towns. And that was the first wave of refugees, and some of them are still refugees from that time. Here's a depiction of the state of Israel and how the yellow areas increase at the expense of the green. Now, in each case, the Israelis can justify the fact, but they were attacked. Generally, they were attacked first, and they responded. They've won every war they've ever had, and they've expanded their territory as a result. And so they say, well, if they hadn't been attacked, they wouldn't have done it, which is probably true. And sometimes the yellow area expanded way beyond the boundary of Israel. But the fundamental issue is that the Palestinians never accepted Resolution 181. And when the Jews declared their state, they tried to fight back. And that was the start of the never-ending cycle of violence, which continues to this day, with the people of Gaza being 1.5% of their population has been killed, and basically all the houses have been reduced to rubble. But still, the Hamas, the reason why Hamas and the Hezbollah want to attack is because, and they can't compromise, is because of their religion compels them to. And the reason that Israel claims the territory is because of the religion, the promised land. In Genesis, God promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan. So Canaan became known as the promised land. Modern Israel and Palestine encompass the majority of Canaan. Abraham's God, anyway, the point is that they believe that God gave them the country, and that gave them the right to come back after 1,000, 2,000 years and say, okay, this is my heritage. I'm ethnically the same as the people that once used to live there, and that's why I'm entitled to claim the land, which is, I don't think has ever been accepted as a justification for colonization.
It works for redbirds.
Anywhere else. Another aspect that the religious motivation for the stance of the Israelis, the covenant with Abraham. According to the covenant, God would offer protection and land to Abraham and his descendants, but they must follow the path of God. God then commanded Abraham and his future generations to perform the ritual of circumcision as a symbol of the covenant. Okay, so loyalty to the religion entitles them to the land. So fundamentally, the claims that Israel makes are religious claims. And yes, Jewishness is both an ethnicity and a religion. And I think that it's true to say that you can be an atheist Jew, but you can't be an atheist Christian or an atheist Muslim because they're not an ethnicity. But Jewishness, true, it is an ethnicity. But if you want to become a Jew, you have to convert to Judaism. And in a sense, it doesn't really matter because Israel has got the Star of David on its national flag, and that is the Jewish symbol. So it's a Jewish state, and a Jewish state, either if it's a religious state, it's a religiously exclusive state. And if it is an ethnicity, then it's a racist state because it's giving preference to one ethnic group. So whichever way you look at it, the establishment of the state of Israel was on flawed grounds, which is why the Arabs have never accepted it. Now, I want to tell you something about so that's the basis of the fanaticism on the Jewish side. And by the way, all of that relates to the so-called prophet Abraham, who never existed. So all of these claims based on the Jewish religion, the right to the land, it's just pure fiction. There's no such right. There's no right. They don't have the right to the land based on their religion because it's all fake. It's the famous archaeologist who himself is Jewish, Israel Finkelstein, in the book The Bible Unearthed. He said it very plainly. There was no prophet Abraham. It was the so-called Abraham would have been 2,000 years BCE, 4,000 years BCE.
2160 BC.
Okay, stand corrected. But there was, it was way before actually the Jewish people became a people. They didn't exist at that time. Now, I want to tell you something about the fanaticism of the Islam religion as in the Quran. And my contention is that it's because of the injustice that they see perpetrated against the Palestinians, who actually a lot of them were Christians, not just Muslims. Most of the Christian Palestinians have all left because they could go somewhere else. Hardly any left. I want to explain how religion has slowly entered and inflamed this conflict. Initially, the PLO was not a religious organization. It was a nationalist. In fact, some of the PLO were Christians, I think. It wasn't a fundamentalist Islamist organization. But gradually, Islamists have taken over the movement, pro-Palestinian movement, and so have fundamentalist Jews taken over the government of Israel. And they've both become more religiously inflamed. And that I want to note the problems inherent in Islam, which are stated in the Quran, which people, I've brought the Quran here because I was accused here of lying by saying this is what's in the Quran. So I'm quoting it, and I can prove it. If someone wants to don't believe it. Chapter 5, verse 51. Believers, take neither Jews nor Christians to be your friends. 2:216. Fighting is obligatory for you. These are all quotes from the Quran. 8:12. I shall cast terror into the hearts of infidels, strike off their heads, strike off the very tips of their fingers. And the next quotes are illustrations of the misogynist nature of Islam that condones violence against women and child marriage and the subjugation of women. 33:55. Prophet, enjoin your wives and daughters and the wives of true believers to draw close their veils so that they may not be molested. So that's why you get all the hijabs and all that, because the Quran says they have to wear that, otherwise they'll be molested by Muslim men. So, and they didn't wear them And I've just come back from Malaysia. They're all covered up. When I first went to Malaysia, not in the 90s, none of them. The Malay girls were miniskirts. Now, child marriage. This is why they didn't believe it. There's a chapter of the Quran called about divorce, and it gives the rules for how long you have to wait till you can divorce your wife. It's called the waiting period. You can divorce your wife just by saying, I divorce you. And it says, this is how long you have to wait. If you're in doubt concerning those of your wives who have ceased menstruating, know that their waiting period is for 3 months. The same shall apply to wives who have not yet menstruated. You see, you can have a child wife who has not yet menstruated, and they even specify the rules how you can divorce this child wife. And the Quran cannot be contradicted, must be obeyed. Men have authority over women because God has made one superior to the other, and because they spend their wealth to maintain them. Women are inferior. Good women are obedient. They guard their parts because God has guarded them. For those from whom you fear disobedience, admonish them, forsake them in beds apart, and beat them. We're trying to do something against violence against women in our society. The Quran, it condones violence against women. This and that religion are indicted for this. They don't deserve respect. They deserve condemnation. Okay, let's try to look for a solution.
It said they can have 4 wives, or how many wives are they allowed?
I don't think it's specified. It specifies plural. It doesn't say how many. I don't know where 4 came from. I think it says as many as they can support. I haven't had any number. I think I've given sufficient indictment of religion. Now, I had some slides on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is actually ironic because it came out the year after the Resolution 181, and many of the articles are actually violated by this establishment of the State of Israel and are violated today. Everyone has a right of free movement and residence. We'll tell that to the people in Gaza. Everyone has a right to enjoy asylum in other countries. Everyone has a right to a nationality. Well, the people in the Palestinians don't have a nationality. Even the so-called Palestinian citizens of Israel, they don't have the same rights as Jewish people. Then, because they're not part of the Jewish nation, people who are part of the Jewish nation have more rights than mere citizens of Israel. Everyone has freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. I wish it were so. But anyway, we're supposed to have these rights. I wanted to highlight my thesis that the establishment of the Jewish state inflamed religious fanaticism. If you look at the long trend of history, things were getting more secular.
Almost the only secular state in the world.
How can a Jewish state be secular? That's a contradiction too.
When Ben Gurion was approached by the ultra-Orthodox community at the time, they said, we don't want to vote. We don't want to have to serve in the military. And he said, it's about 500 of you. No problem. Just ignore it. It's now about 1 million. Because their family size is simply enormous. And that creates a huge problem. You can't possibly form a government without an ultra-religious party, which is why they have so much power. It's not that the country is religious. It's not. It's a secular state. But the religious people are such a huge minority, we can't govern without them. That's the problem.
I see your point, but there's a legal distinction in Israel between Jews and non-Jews. They don't have the same rights, especially to land. Now, anyway, despite that, even though that's true, the Palestinians still see a sense of injustice that they've been dispossessed, which they have been. I tried to establish this theory by looking at the timelines. There's this thing called Google's Ngram. What it does is goes through all the published books in every year and notes the frequency of key words in all the books. So from this graph, you can see from the publications how frequently a particular keyword was used. And this one is a Jewish state, and it peaks at around 1950 or something, I'd say. now gone off the scale. Anyway, the frequency of the words Islamic State only started much later. So what I'm saying, you can't prove it, but one was a reaction to the other. That's the type of argument I'm trying to put forward. Jihad, it's too low, it's off the screen. Here's an interesting one. How popular is the word secular and secularism? The green one is secular and the red one is secularism. And it's been around for a hell of a long time, secularism. It's taken a bit of a battering through the 19th century. Well, the graph goes a lot further, but anyway, it's increased in popularity somewhat. Okay, now how do we solve this problem? There's been two, I think, resolutions on the conflict this year in the UN General Assembly. And Australia voted for one of them and abstained for the second one. And they were calling for an end, a ceasefire, and a two-state solution. And I think that, yes, the only way is to have a resolution and that everyone agrees to it. And then including both the Israelis and the Palestinians need to agree to it. And then someone needs to enforce it. Well, the situation is so bad that I think that, it's actually looking not impossible. There'll have to be some resolution, and someone is going to say, it's going to have to be the US president, which if it's Trump, it wouldn't be him, has got to say, stop, you guys. You've got to bang your heads together and just stop it. So, solution on the table is a two-state solution. The Oslo Accords got somewhat close to that, and Arafat was going to sign it. It was a much better deal for the Israelis because they kept control of the army. They had control. There was meant to be a neutral police force. Arafat was going to sign it until he went back to Ramallah, and then they told him, "You sign that, you're a dead man." Who's that? Well, the other Palestinians, they didn't accept it. The problem is that most of the fanatical Palestinians, probably not the moderate ones, they don't want any solution. Hamas, they want Palestine to be free from the river to the sea.
Which means the extermination of the Jews.
Well, not necessarily. Depends on how you interpret it. Let's try to think of how a compromise could work. Now, let's say you could have a binational state. Let's say you could have a two-state solution, and they can both live side by side.
We've seen how that's worked.
Well, this is the point. This is the main point I'm going to make today. Yes, the only way it will work is if both sides renounce their religious claims.
They won't be enough for religion.
Well, they won't. Well, that's why.
Where the source of religion comes from.
Well, that's why.
Well,
I know, but that's why I'm saying religion is the cause of the problem. Unless we address the cause, we'll never find a solution. Well, we're atheists. We've removed it from ourselves. Can be done. Okay. So anyway, I think that one of the stumbling blocks is who's going to patrol the border between Egypt and Gaza. Germans. I think what is needed is an impartial military force and let it come in on the border. I think that that's what Hamas wants, which is why Israel won't sign an agreement, because they want to control the border. I think that that would be good, because if the precedent is established of having an international force there, then that can be slowly empowered to control security so that both sides feel safe. There's never going to be any solution until both sides feel safe. And the number one thing is the curse of religion has to be seen as that and addressed. And that's why I say religion should be indicted for this reason. So that's a back questions. Oh, okay. Stephen's got his hand up as usual. Okay, Stephen.
I see you have a big problem. The religious breed in huge numbers, whereas the atheists a declining group in numbers in society due to the fact that they don't breed. So, I mean, religion has the power to continue a species, whereas you atheists are a dying breed. So, I mean, I'm sorry, you can come up with the most cogent arguments in the universe, but if you die out, you do not matter in evolution. Evolution says you atheists suck. Simple.
By the way,
Try and answer that one.
religion is not an inherited character. It's not a genetic characteristic. Religion is a gene. Next.
You said there can't be an agreement between the Israelites and the Palestinians because of religion, but in Northern Ireland, where the Catholics and Protestants fought each other, I think, for about 400 years, they came to an agreement somehow. I don't know how, but they did.
Well, Bill Clinton had a say in it. I think they respected him. And also, they just, it was more a nationalist dispute rather than a religious one. Yeah, it was kind of less difficult problem, I think. James, welcome back.
Hello, John.
Hi.
Thanks for your presentation. It was interesting. I have one observation. You made brief quotes from the Quran,
Yeah.
and I would think that 8:12, verse 12, is a declaration of war.
8:12, yeah.
And regardless of all who's right and who's wrong in Israel and Gaza, at least the Jews are fighting the war on our behalf because we're also possible victims of the Islamic cause.
Well, we are. We have been, definitely. Yes. That's why I argue we've got to quote those and ask them to reject. Ask them, do you support this? And if they do, they're discredited, and make them answer.
But as you've already said, it's irrefutable. The Quran is irrefutable.
Well, let them refute it. Let them refute it. Anyway.
Yeah.
Christians can refute the Bible. They don't have to believe in the resurrection. So let them change. They can just abandon their fanaticism. We have to put pressure on them to stop it. Stop their religious fanaticism. We've got to get this problem solved. We have to.
Yeah. So, John, I read Louise Adler's article as well, and I sympathised with some of I agree with some of her arguments, but to read a whole article of many, many words, and she doesn't mention Hamas once. She doesn't talk about any culpability on the Palestinian side was quite an indictment, I thought.
Yes, she didn't mention Hamas, and she's been criticised for not mentioning Hamas. Louise Adler, everyone should condemn violence on both sides. I don't know whether you necessarily have to say it in every sentence. I just want to say one thing I thought I could mention about the history, another aspect of religion. In as you know, the Muslims ban lending money at interest, and Christians also at one time had a ban on the lending of money for interest in the Middle Ages, but the Jews didn't have that. And so the Jews were given the responsibility to lend money at interest because they had to, because no one else would.
Yeah, because they owned a lot of that.
And yeah, well, naturally they made a lot of money out of it. They made a lot of money, and they were castigated as the money lenders. But they were put in that role because of the religious told them. The religion put them in that role, and then they were persecuted because of that. And then the other thing, a lot of the people who wanted to start the state of Israel were German Jews, and they were seen as being disloyal to the German state because they wanted to go up and set a state somewhere else. So that's another reason why it didn't, because they were seen as being disloyal to the German state by wanting to set up another state. So, not that it doesn't justify anything, just it's part of an explanation. We're very late. We had a very late start, and we somehow seized victory from the jaws of defeat. So welcome, and thank you, everybody. And our next month speaker will be James Fordor. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone.
I just wanted to say thanks,
Yes,
John.
Dee.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to ask a question, but just to say there's just so many things going through my mind. I didn't even know where to start, about a million things. So that's why I didn't contribute a question. But yeah, thank you. Interesting topic.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Keep up the good work.
For coming along.
Thanks.
Okay, good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Well, hopefully we'll be back in the Unitarian Church next month.
Yeah, yeah.